We move to our next session for today, which is harmonizing data-driven design with patient experience, which will be delivered by two speakers from HDR from the US. And our guest speakers are Mr. James Atkinson, the Vice President and Director of Health in HDR, and Mr. محمد أيوب. I'll introduce Mr. James first. He's a recognized expert in planning and design of complex state-of-the-art healthcare facilities, bringing transformative ideas to a variety of healthcare planning and design projects. He has dedicated his 26-year career exclusively to the design of health and wellness facilities. And then Mr. محمد أيوب, who's a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects. He is the design director of HDR in Manhattan office. He was awarded 40 under recognition by Building Design and Construction in 2011 for design leadership in the industry. We welcome both of you, and we hope it would be a nice session in this regard.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the great introduction. And again, we'd like to thank Mr. Malik Musa for hosting this event. We're very much privileged to discuss harmonizing data-driven design with patient experience. But before we start, and I know yesterday we said, let's switch off the mobile phones or put them on silent. If anyone has a QR code reader on their mobile devices, if you want to download this app in the meantime, I'll explain it to you at the end of our presentation.
Yeah, so we have a little surprise for you. So if you can, we're gonna leave it up for a little while so you can hopefully download the app, and we'll explain a little bit more as we get into our presentation.
So, I mean, the whole notion of all this is that we're trying to advance health and wellness on a global scale, and it's about basically creating communities. It's the heart of our endeavor, why we're doing all of this. So experience design, and what we want to do is break out the two pieces. What is experience design, or how we interpret experience design, and what is data-driven design, and then how do they both converge into what we've done. And we'll show you some examples of works that we've done.
So just kind of starting off, kind of give you an idea of what experience design is. It's taking a conceptual idea and then turning it into reality. So it's taking it from the concept, looking at the opportunities, identifying what they are. It's looking at the need from the users. It's ideation, it's coming up with the ideas, moving into prototyping, coming up with some concrete examples of them, making a case for it, and then making sure that you can scale it and execute it. And that's an iterative process. So that it also then turns back into conceptualizing again. So it's just a flowing process. And then also we want to look at solving it at every layer. There are 4 different areas. We have environment, operations, the service model. Then also the thing that kind of holds them all together is the enabling technology. It's at that center, that focal point where you see the kind of triangle area. That's where the patient experience really comes together.
So, but from a building point of view, what we've called the 6 E's. When you look at best practices, we always talk about how to have control over your environment. Obviously, it's about safety, control of the sound levels, connection with nature, as we've just earlier heard on this morning, lighting and artwork. But really, we look at experience beyond just the building fabric. We talk about how do you entice that individual to come to your health system? How do they even approach the building? How do they enter? How do they explore the facility? And how do they engage it? And how do they exit? And of course, how do you build that extension? What is the follow-up beyond just visiting, whether it's an inpatient or an ambulatory system? So I have a small video. We may want to put the volume down now. So about 10 years ago, myself, Jim, and actually Steve Goins sitting here, we were tasked by Dr. Toby Cosgrove because he looked at his facility and at Cleveland Clinic, Ohio, and he realized that people came to the facility not for the experience, but for the level of care they were receiving from a technical health caregiver point of view. And experience and patient engagement and empathy was missing. So the notion of the chief experience officer was coined about a decade ago when we were about to start designing this facility. So we took those and we actually looked at the facilities on how we approached design, how you actually enticed an individual, how did they arrive at the point of objective, where is that, and you kind of see where we've come along. I mean, this is about a decade in the making, and it's been open for the last couple of years. But we've actually went and studied hospitality. We were benchmarking the system beyond just healthcare. Looked at hotels, how rooms were set up, how was catering stayed, the whole notion of control of your environment, food service. So experience is just beyond the building. It's not the building, it's about the operational model and how we actually end up with that. And how do you affect them, their families, and the caregivers. Data-driven design. Data-driven design is a process, but it's actually something that started, decades ago. We now use great tools such as Rhino, Grasshopper, all those kind of BIM technologies, but really it's no different than a complex Excel spreadsheet. And we call that computational design.
That's right. Computational design is kind of what we use it for is analyzing workflows. We're using it as design tools. We're using it to analyze what our designs look like. And so we're going to go through a little bit more. We're going to show you some examples of that. So we'll advance the slide. So workflow, it's looking at the operations within our facilities. It's understanding what the different tasks are, and then trying to make it more efficient. So we start looking at travel distances. We start looking at minimizing sneak time with our caregivers, but also we use this also for the workflow within an architecture department as to how we design.
But then even within the design, we're able to quickly, let's say, compute and run different iterations. So we take that workflow, we apply it, we come up with different massing models and studies. What you're seeing is something what we've called the Data Wrangler. It's a name I'm still struggling with. It's a proprietary software we've come up with. But it starts analyzing all these different, ways of how you look at a building design and what are the kind of key drivers.
So in real time, we can actually look at if the different aspects of a building. How much exterior glass, how much exterior skin. Also the differences between departments, how much support space we have. We can also analyze it from a building standpoint for how much energy it uses. So we're able to look at all these different components at the same time. So that we're not just designing around one particular thing, but we're also capturing the complete experience. Because we know that in the kingdom, there's a lot of light here, there's a lot of heat, so we want to make sure that we can minimize the different aspects of it, like glare. A little bit higher, sorry, thanks.
And then we look at benchmarking, because we're building a wealth of this information. So how does that system, compare to other hospitals that we've done? So that enables us to kind of look at the whole data. So it's not just a data like it's narrowed down to a specific building type, but how is it benchmarked against other systems that we've done? So that way we can learn from that. And that's really kind of, the essential drivers of data-driven design. So these are numbers and masses and plugs. And today, these have to be visualized. You can look at them in a virtual reality realm. You can look at it on augmented reality. We'll come back to that QR code where you empower, whether it's the caregiver or the public or the users and the visitors, to be able to get access to the facility. Whether they can see a building before it's even brought up on site in real time, or look at it in augmented reality. So that's in a nutshell the two ideas, but how have they converged in the last few years? And we're going to go through some examples.
So we have two examples. One's an ambulatory care center, another one's an inpatient environment. We just want to show you how these tools, we've used them to help design a physical manifestation of what a patient experience would look like.
So Kaiser Permanente, they wanted to reimagine ambulatory care design. They recognized that they basically only have access to care at the end, or basically when somebody was sick. So we basically were retained to look at ethnography. I mean, part of the whole experience design, you actually have to go out. I think Susan yesterday mentioned you need to go and meet, interview, carry out all these studies. So we sat down with 150 members and non-members, and we did a series of ethnography studies of how we looked at those things. What are basically a human-centered design going to be for them?
So we looked at, well, there's two different aspects, right? So you have the membership domain, which would be like the patient's domain, and then you also have Kaiser Permanente's sphere of influence. The sphere of influence really had to do when a patient or a person, a human, became a patient, because they had some kind of illness. And so really what we were looking at, what we were trying to do was embody or start to, Kaiser Permanente was really concerned about how can they move from the business of illness, but also move into the wellness area. And so it was really trying to encapsulate the total patient experience.
And that basically had a lot of theoretical, kind of, let's say, non-physical environments and aspects to it, but it also meant that there was going to be a physical manifestation of this ambulatory care that we called the health hub. But that was actually still in the illness realm at one time, because it was the hospital, their existing clinic, and how was that health hub going to be basically moving towards wellness? And it enabled us to study with them other aspects, what we call link, medicate, pivot, and cultivate.
So you can see that there's a timeline here. So you have illness on the lower side, as well as wellness as you move up through it. But there's also the life integration. It's like how can you get into one of your members' lives? What type of activities or what kind of devices? How can you really get more involved in their life experience? And so what Mohammed's showing you here is that there are these things called Blink, which is a network of nurse-run neighborhood clinics, which is still kind of in the illness area. But then it was also developing the med kit, which is starting to get closer to wellness. The med kit was a mobile web-enabled navigation tool that helps a patient or a member try to find different levels of care. And then if you looked at Pivot and Cultivate, these were really tools to help engage the member and to start developing a healthier lifestyle.
So what is the Health Hub? At a glance, it's about basically creating a hyper-efficiency new operational model to achieve value added for member experience and to improve outpatient care. And there are areas of focus. I mean, basically, it's like a Rubik's Cube of goals to achieve these designs in a Health Hub. So
looking at the community, the Health Hub connects the community in a locally significant way, reinforcing its integral role. So it really wanted to be part of the community. And some of these attributes were reflecting the local culture, blurring the edges of what the community was and what this facility might be. And it was also a beacon of community pride. These were all aspirational ideas. It also was connecting. It was encouraging unplanned interactions between the members. How do you do that? How do you create an environment that attracts people, that gets them to come to this area when they're well? And it was also like trying to accommodate varying degrees of privacy and public interaction.
Thrive. This is like their brand. But really it's about, what is the Health Hub? It's about exposure to living, wellness, being healthy, participation, active and energetic. We're going to come back to the notion of this. What is waiting rooms? I mean, waiting areas, and how we've kind of started phasing those out. Because a Health Hub has to be a home that recognizes the individual. It's about human connection. It's the kind of like the happenstance. We were talking this morning, balancing the areas of quiet reflection and solitude. And it really forms to this thing, what we called it the public square. That is basically the placemaking that aspires. People sometimes come in and they're direct. They want to go in, they want to just go see, their doctor or the nurse, and they will leave. There are others who may meander, and there are others who are lingering. So we're looking at creating a public square that is actually about community. And it's not just about a place where you're waiting to go. And this is when we started talking about, do we essentially need waiting areas? Or, of course, you're going to need seating, but it's a matter of these should be places of learning, of interaction. It's not about waiting. But you definitely have to have a notion of moving between private and semi-private.
So looking at the environment, we have outdoor spaces as well as indoor spaces, and then it's these areas that are between, so we can start encapsulating some of the views of nature, bring gardens inside. But it's also as Mohammed mentioned, it's also the private to social. So it's we're looking at private spaces, you got semi-private spaces, and then you have these two different social areas that one's socially active as well as one's socially passive. And then what the different areas of privacy are. So we're going to kind of go through that and give you some examples of what these environments started to look like.
So in Chino Grand, we looked at this because the weather allows for it. That public square had an inside and an outside zone. So it wasn't always conditioned space that people could sit and interact. These are obviously California-based facilities. In Santa Clara, again, there is this kind of like blurring the line of the edges. The building itself is no longer just the physical embodiment of a conditioned space. And again, what happens inside? Waiting is no longer like just waiting, but it's about social interaction. It's about engagement, because this has to be about community, and it's not about just, it's about a lifetime relationship. And that Thrive Bar, I think earlier on you heard about these kind of, let's say, nurse-run clinic sessions, which are, just basically the moment to kind of engage the patient, to learn from what their lifestyles are, to help them improve their lifestyles, because you're interacting with them. They can look at different ways of vitality and balances.
And then the front porch. The front porch is the first place that you see that you have that first interaction. It's the front porch is that semi-private kind of public space that allows for different ways of interacting. So you see that we were starting to look at what the front porch might be, how you can draw people in off the street, and it was really about like education. How do you educate folks, or how do you motivate people to educate? And can you take those little sound bites and start educating people, or get them interested in learning about wellness and their health? And so, taking all that, there's the clinical module aspect of it, because this was also a clinic. It needed to take care of patients, and so it was trying to reimagine that space. So if you look at the next slide, the clinical module, it looks very typical. It was a 12 exam room module that's divided between two different spaces. So you see that the enclosed spaces are more your modules, and then that open space that's between. We were reimagining that. What does the caregiver area look like? And here's an example of what that might look like. Was trying to allow more natural light in, and making it more of an interactive space, the team-based space. And then going into the exam room, reimagining that, because a lot of times 90% of the patients that came to these clinics didn't require an exam table. So if you looked at what this room could look like, this doesn't look like a typical, go ahead, this one, Mohammed. But also we want to look at flexibility and adaptability over time. These spaces are going to change, and the patient population will change over time. And so we just want to make sure that what we designed was very flexible and can be adapted over time.
And then there is the enclave, the typical, let's say, where the offstage, the doctors, the nurses all gather. But we pull that out, whereas typically within the actual clinic module, this has actually been pulled off to the sides. It is really almost like an enclave in that sense, where the doctors and nurses can have their own social interaction, and they can have their own note-taking, and they're off the, let's say, the public realm. But the spaces themselves don't have to be static. Some of them are going to be, it's not really truly a hoteling in that sense, because, you know, there are moments for privacy. You can carry out some note-taking, or you can have more of an interaction, let's say, touch point. And to do all of this, we actually had to initially create mock-ups. And this is the part of prototyping that Jim mentioned earlier. This whole prototyping is like we did it in a warehouse, and then we brought in all the users to experience this. So as we were testing this, and it was an iterative process of you know, how you basically converging experience and data-driven design, is that we were able to then move and flex these things. And that basically takes us to that spectrum, that whatever we're designing is scalable. So this could happen on a smaller scale, from 8,000 square foot clinic to a large, you know, well, this in this case is ambulatory, so it's all like 100,000 square feet. But it translates to millions of square feet for a hospital.
That's right.
You know, there's more, if you want to read more about it. It was featured by Innovation by Design. It won the award in 2016. So if people have access to Fast Company, there's more data on that, or you can talk to us afterwards. The second example, you know, so we did ambulatory care. We're now going to look at inpatient. So Penn Medicine.
This is an inpatient environment. It was how can we evaluate design through the lens of experience throughout the building and across a campus. So we're looking at a very large facility where we started off looking at this very small little module that it was a clinic that could be expanded. We also wanted to look at the inpatient environment. So here's an example where we worked with our experienced design team, and we were looking at how the whole campus could be interactive. Here's kind of a stacking diagram. This building was over 1 million square feet, and it had over 400 beds. There were procedure room spaces, there was an emergency room, there were everything that you would see in a typical inpatient environment. But we went through this exercise.
So we're not always able to actually go out in the field and do, you know, ethnography and interact with people and get that engagement, because sometimes it's either the location doesn't allow it or the time doesn't allow it. So we look at persona development, and we look at, you know, multiple persona developments, and, you know, looking at the whole, you know, you map the individual journey. And this happens into kind of, let's say, a process. So we do not do it like, we don't assign it to one team. This happens collectively. And we literally, let's say we create the first persona. We named her Lillian. But to come up to that persona and create that entirety, we actually sat down and we basically spent 30-minute, you know, group exercises. We broke down what that persona development was. And we went through all kind of like a deep dive, what they might want, like, all the things that we would look at, and how would they arrive. And we created multiple personas based on that. And then even then, as we kept refining this persona, because it has a sense of bias, since we weren't able to do real-time ethnography, we basically vetted it through multiple iterations. So you have focus groups looking at this and adjusting that persona, and then that persona is then created multiple times to create different personas.
But part of that whole thing was was the experience mapping, was imagining what the different types of people were, but also then what were the different events in their life that caused them to come to an inpatient environment. And so we went through each one of those different scenarios so that we could really map out the experience and also create an environment that catered to that.
So similar to what we showed earlier, we looked at basically, you know, how is Lillian's arrival? How does she basically, you know, come through diagnosis and engage the hospital? What are the treatments she's having? What is the recovery level and then the discharge? And all of that. So that's one individual persona. And we did that in multiple personas. And of course, common themes that everybody always talks about, you know, intuitive wayfinding, you know, what do you do with your personal belonging? Patient movement, family, communication, technology, balancing high tech and high touch. But then this all goes into, let's say, creating that persona. And then how do we go to this kind of, let's say, you know, the ephemeral kind of link and hospitality. And what that journey is. So in Lillian's case, how is she going through that floor? Where are the points of arrival? The circulation and the destination.
So we could really design that whole experience so that we took Lillian on her journey. We knew what the spaces that she needed to interact with. We knew where she was traveling to, and what that experience would be like. And so we were really able to start looking at what those interaction points were between Lillian and the caregivers, as well as Lillian's family, and then what that experience might look like.
So from the reception desk, that's more like a concierge desk, to, let's say, intimate meetings, the points of, as you said, that kind of respite, individual kind of getting yourself together. Visual cues, how do you get from one area to the other? Because it is a large hospital. Circulation is key. Even within that, how is the corridor designed? Do you have moments of touch points, sitting down and respite? All those things lead to eventually destination, whether the destination is a patient room, or even at the end, where, let's say, somebody's saying, I need to take a break, or somebody needs to rest, let's go wait at the end of the patient floor, and they have views out so someone can rest. But it's about total experience, both for the patient and their family, and ultimately also the caregivers. So that takes us to our final example. So we've done this in the States, and we've done this in Canada, Germany, Australia. So the oldest medical city in the kingdom, King Saud Medical City in Riyadh or Shemasi. We took it, this is an old, so over 50 years old, and we looked at the whole campus master plan. And it was about decanting the campus and building a new master plan that actually looked at careful, let's say, sequencing of buildings. But to get to that, we basically had to look at how we're going to apply these tools that we did before. So we did it, our data-driven design started off with, analysis of a typical patient floor. We started off with the bar. What were the key drivers, travel distance, the kind of like how much respite, support, the cause, all those things. Where are the breakpoints? Where does a floor plate become inefficient? But what are the experiences like? So we were measuring all these things to analyze that, the site constraints. All those things enabled us to kind of, let's say, arrive to a design that is uniquely for them, that reflects the oldest medical city, but at the same time, it kind of looked at the whole notion of how does this thing, operationalize, and from what experience we're looking at it. Here, you start looking at multiple iteration, and it's about arriving at multiple concepts. So we basically had 3 concepts, but each concept had multiple iterations until you arrive to the one that's unique to them. And where it's well balanced and it meets expectations and aspiration of what they consider to be their point. But that goes into a micro level, because we even looked at the actual patient room itself. How much glass, the ratio of glass, all those things, screening, all these things have a play. The heat gain coefficient, measuring MEP, all that actually affects experience, because and that's really where you converge between data-driven and experience, marrying those categories together to arrive into a master plan for them. And so, we had to then eventually create a visual for them, because somebody sometimes wants to see that. And again, as I said, you end up with data points and numbers and models, but not everybody's an architect, not everyone is an engineer, and some people need to actually physically see it. So we had to create tools for them to actually experience. In this case, the tool is used by the client to actually, walk people through it. This is now in the public realm. It's available for anyone to actually walk and experience before it's actually been built. But that actually becomes entice. And then you look at, somebody who's now familiar with it, they look at how they're going to arrive and enter. They already are pre-familiarized with the building campus. How do they approach intuitive wayfinding, the drop-off, whether you drop off at the main floor or at the parking level? How does everything kind of lead to that? Waiting is no longer waiting, but there's cafes of that, and it becomes that public square. And the public square is actually elevated onto multiple volumes. this isn't just a singular floor. Similar to what you said, it helps people understand and orientate themselves. But exploring is beyond just a building. You know, this is a nation that's heavily anchored on faith and belief. How do you take that realm? The notion of prayer areas, that we have abundance around the whole campus, but you have a central mosque. But even the mosque itself is its own articulate form that actually makes somebody reflect. You know, because at the end of the day, when all things fail, faith is the only thing that keeps us going. And then you're exploring the space. At the end of the patient tower, you know, the actual patient, you know, we talked earlier, somebody is tired, they need to rest. Grandpa needs to rest, or, you know, mom needs to sleep.
But looking at the patient experience, but also designing the facility so that they can explore, that they know which areas that they can go into and explore. So we really look at on stage, off stage, so that the things that are behind the scenes stay behind the scenes, and that and you create an environment that's enticing to allow your patients and your loved ones to come here and explore.
And you know, so this is a double height space within 2 patient floors. So we even actually opened that whole respite zone out so you can have that interaction. But how do you engage? I mean, even from the patient room, empowering having access to that chart. The room itself should not feel like a hospital room. Everything is concealed. You can see medical gases are, can we say, concealed behind these solid forms. But even then, the engagement is about control. How do you control your lighting environment? You know, with LED technology, how do you actually have all that effect? And at the end, when it's quiet time and sleep time, how do you still allow a light at the front door, you know, to that room, so a nurse can come in, she can do her rounds, but it doesn't disrupt sleep. All those technologies are about engaging. And lastly, exiting. How do you exit the facility? How do you leave and discharge? And beyond that is the extension. You know, where do you come back for a follow-up? Is it all digital? You know, that's what we end up with.
So some of the key takeaways are always start with the user's voice, whether through personas or interviews, so that we're grounding what we're actually designing around. We want to make sure that it's a reality, it's not just our assumptions.
Consider the entire experience. I think that's really about exploring the whole notion. It's beyond just the building. It's actually how are they leaving from their home, taking that journey, arriving at the facility.
And then designing the key components of experience at the same time. Prevents rework for us. If you're thinking about everything at once, you're making sure that you're making all those touch points and designing around the right things.
And then leverage that experience. It's beyond just patient experience. I think patient experience, ultimately, with data-driven design, it leads to patient engagement. But we have to look at all the users. You know, you have to look at family and the staff and the physician, because the right facility is also about retention. Because if you have the right inspired staff, you have a more successful facility.
That's right. An experience design is scalable and adaptable. You got to be able to take that experience, and whether or not it's a small clinic or whether or not it's a large acute care facility.
So I don't know how many of you were able to download the app in the time that we have spoken. So if you were to bring it up, you can see how quickly it was. If you hold up your devices and point it at the screen, you're able to actually see this facility in augmented reality. And that's really just shows you how the power of entombment, like this is, you know, your devices, your handheld devices are your, you know, biggest enabler and empowerment to you.
So if you look through your device, you'll see that it's augmented reality. It will pop up the floor plan. It will allow you to experience this in 3 dimensions and actually look at it from all angles. Come up to us afterwards if you'd like a copy of this site plan, and you can take it with you and experience it on your own.
Thank you very much.